On today's show, Dustin Dopirak from the Indy Star joins me to talk all things Pacers Media Day, and we get a quick glance at Pacers training camp. You guys are going to love today's show. Let's get to it.
This is Tyrese, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
What's up, Pacer Nation? Welcome back to another episode here of your go-to Pacers podcast, Setting the Pace. And joining me today to talk about all things Media Day, he actually took my phone call in the pantry. It is Dustin Dopirak. How's it going, my man?
Doing well, man. I've got questions about that whole story. I'm like, wait, what? But I got a kick out of it because somebody asked, or Tony asked how he fits in a pantry, and he was reminded, I think by Mike Preston, that some people do own, NBA players do own pantries big enough for themselves to fit in, apparently.
Yeah, so if anybody's curious what we're talking about today at Media Day, we were asking J Huff. Tony asked J Huff, when did you find out about the trade of the Pacers? He said him and his wife were hiding in a pantry. I think they were either scaring her parents or his parents. I can't remember which parents they were scaring. And
I think it was hers. It was hers. Yeah,
okay.
It was at the in-laws' house, if I'm not mistaken.
Gotcha. I couldn't remember, so I said their parents on my tweet. People were like, their parents. I'm like, okay, this is not what I meant for it to be.
Right.
But I'm just saying one of their parents.
One of their sons. Yes. I think both parents were in town.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I think the parents are close.
Right. Okay. That's cool. Anyway, that's great for them. Yeah, great for them. It's just really funny to hear that a guy was hiding in a pantry trying to scare his parents. That is something that I would do. My parents have a walk-in pantry, and every once in a while, I'm just messing around. I'll be in the house, and I'll just like walk in there, and then like they open the door, and I'm just like pop out, and we're just being silly. That's just I like to play jokes like that. But I thought it was funny, and I think J Huff. Anything that you learned from him today at Media Day? I thought he was interesting.
Yeah, no, he was interesting. I found intriguing his shout out to Memphis, which was politically loaded. And we're just gonna bypass that entirely. But yeah, no, I mean, I am working on a piece on Jay, so I've talked to his dad actually, and trying to work on just the kind of the life story deal. And he was as entertaining, maybe more entertaining than I was expecting. And just obviously we only got like 10 or 15 minutes of him. You're starting to see that. But I mean, I think certainly the intriguing story with him is just how much he had to go through just to really land in the NBA. And I think that kind of goes back for him is that, he's been a guy, he's one of those super tall guys that took a while to put weight on. I mean, I guess you kind of remember Virginia, he was super skinny. It took him a while to get, just to get established. He redshirted, I think, as a true freshman. Was on, I think, pretty deep on the bench on that the national championship team. I think he was either a freshman or a sophomore, a redshirt freshman or a redshirt sophomore on that team. And by the end of it, I think he was, either ACC Defensive Player of the Year or first team All Defense, something along those lines. But it sort of has always sort of taken him a while, and he's been in the league for 4 years now. Just like I think the last year was his fourth season. It was the first time he was anybody's rotation. He was a two-way contract guy that entire time. It's wild. I mean, he's 1 year younger than Miles Turner, I think, and he's played, I think, a 10th as many NBA games and maybe a 20th as many minutes. It's wild to consider just how different his path has been. But it was entertaining to hear him talk about it. I mean, he doesn't sound like, wow, it's been a grind. It was just like, yeah, it's tough to move, but all this stuff has been fun. I've liked every city I went to, and I was excited about the idea of going to Europe if it was going to happen. I mean, I'm glad I'm still in the States, but I was ready, and it would have been fun, and it would have been a great league and a great place to play, and I'd have been totally happy there. But this is where I am, and I'm really happy to be in Indiana, but I love Memphis too. And I thought it was just cool to hear just his level of like kind of gratitude about the whole situation. Because I mean, he has had to really grind it out. He's had seasons where he's played like 5 NBA games or 7, or I think the most he had before last season was 20. And it's 40 something G League games and whatnot. I mean, he's playing in, Grand Rapids and Capital City Go-Go and all this kind of stuff. And so he's really had to scrap and claw. I think he's, you expected him to be excited about this because it's like, okay, like this is best fit you're going to have, because it's a team that likes you and needs desperately what you bring, because you don't, they have other pieces that could play center, but they don't have specifically what he can do. I mean, he's the one guy that's an established shooter out of the group. And so you get the impression that he gets that, it seems like he's going to be an entertaining quote. So I'm looking forward to covering him. But the center's position is going to be really interesting, in terms of how this is going to shake out. If Tony Bradley makes the team, and that's not at all guaranteed, and it's probably unlikely at this point, but whether it's 3 or 4 guys, I think all of them are going to have to play, and all of them are going to have to make a difference.
If Tony Bradley makes the team, I think somebody has to get cut. I can't.
Well, somebody does. Yeah, somebody does. I mean, because it would be, basically it's either Delon Wright or I don't know
Tony
if
Bradley.
it's Delon or Tony Bradley. Because I mean,
I think it's DeLon.
Delon. Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
catch the pronunciation yet, but it's like you would think he has the edge just because I think they really feel like they need that third point guard. I don't think they feel like they can.
Yeah, no, you're good.
He's in a minute here. It's going to happen. It's going to come back to me. But he is going to be. I think they feel like they needed a pure third point guard. Somebody could do that. Obviously, they brought in Monte Morris. It didn't work out because of the calf. But I think that's a higher priority. I think Bradley's only hope is that either Wiseman or Jackson isn't ready. I think they're going to feel like I think they feel like they need 3 point guards and they need 3 bigs. But if one of those 3 big step turns out not to be ready to go. And I think they feel good that they are. It sounds like by all accounts, Isaiah Jackson says he feels like he's in good shape. Rick Carlisle sees good signs, but it's a question of, okay, once you get into camp, once you actually get into playing every day, what's that look like? How do you recover? Are you going to be able to play back-to-backs? Are you going to be able to play 2 games in a row, even if it's a couple of days of separation? I think they're waiting to see. I think it's less about what Tony Bradley does in camp, and it's more about what James Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson do in camp, as far as whether he, maintains an opportunity. They like Tony. I mean, I think it speaks well for Tony Bradley that he is sticking around and they're impressed enough with what they've seen. But I just can't imagine, you would have to. There would be dead cap money involved in cutting either James Wiseman or Isaiah Jackson, where you can cut Tony Bradley and not lose anything. So certainly he's the most likelihood to be let go. And again, it has to be somebody, and maybe one of those somebodies ends up with a Noblesville Boom situation, but maybe not. But you would think Delon has the advantage, but they also do not want to go in with only 2 functional centers.
No, I mean, I totally agree with that. And I was going to say, I know it's a rule the NBA has in place, but the fact that Tyrese Halliburton has to count against a 15-man roster, you don't usually see that in a lot of sports. I feel like there's
there's an IR in football. There's an injury list in baseball. I don't follow hockey close enough. I presume they have something, but it does make it more difficult on you that you could have a guy be out all year and he counts against your cap, and he counts against, your roster space. And then obviously you can get an exception that gives you, frees up some money, that you can use, but it's not the full number. And, you are penalized pretty harshly for having injured players.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that they count against your cap and you have to pay them because it's all guaranteed money and things like that. I'm not worried about that. I just think that it's weird that, this guy's going to be ruled out for the year. The NBA has already said that's probably likely to happen by giving them the disabled player exception. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well now this guy counts against you. So now you can only have 14 players plus your 2-way guys, but your 2-way guys are limited because they have to reach a certain threshold of only so much experience in the league. And it's just, I just think the NBA, as they've evolved and they've added more roster spots, maybe they think about this because not saying that you need an IR or a disabled list, whatever, in terms of baseball, the DL, the 15-day DL or whatever it is, so many days you can be on the disabled list. I mean, they've got to find a way because to me, it's just a lot of players Damian Lillard's taking up a roster spot now. The same thing for Jason Tatum, all these guys that can't play this year. Kyrie Irving, another one that might not play much this year. They count against the roster. It's if they come back when they're healthy, sure, take them off the IR. You have to cut somebody. That's when that decision has to be made. But the fact that you can't just have a 15-man roster with how freak injuries are already, I just think it's a little bit ridiculous in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I get the idea of feeling okay, for most NBA teams, you're not using your 15th guy very much. You generally have, a 10-man rotation for most of the season, and you shrink that by the time you get deeper in there. And it's okay, do you really need another guy just to station that guy on the bench if he's going to be there all year? But, you do see these situations where you have a rash of injuries. Certainly you saw Philadelphia go through it last year. I mean, I think they want it for the opportunity to give guys, that are further down, more opportunity. Somebody that's already, on the list, somebody that you already have. So I imagine there would be some of the pushback might come from the Players Association when it comes to this, just to make sure some of these guys that are hanging around that are in on 2-way deals or whatever, an opportunity. But you think maybe just do something like to your point, have one of your 2-way guys. If you got somebody who's out for the year, you remove your games limit. For somebody like that. Is in the Pacers case, you could say all right, Quentin Jackson gets to play all 82 if he wants to, if you can have that or something like that, or gets to suit up or whatever it is, or even if it's just games that you actually entered is what count against you as opposed to games that you suit up, could make a difference as well. And so I mean, I would, I think it's fair to say that there could be things that they could do to make your life easier than they do. But it is tough. I mean, again, like if you're, if you're an NFL team and your quarterback tears his ACL, well, you at least get a spot, like get something you can do with that. Or same deal with your, starting left fielder goes down. I mean, you get to pick somebody up. It wouldn't bother me if they did have some form of injury reserve. Just from a fan standpoint, I'm interested to see what it is that actually holds them back. I'm guessing it's trying to force them to give opportunities to guys that are already on the team. That's the best I can come up with.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, I didn't really think about it from that perspective, from a players association, perspective, but it does make sense, and can't change it right now. Obviously, it's not
sure. Nothing to think about it now. Yeah,
right. So you're kind of torn now between like, okay, do they want to go with that third string point guard in DeLon Wright or fourth big and Tony Bradley? They don't have any bigs on their two-way deals either, so they're pretty much all guard heavy at that point. So it is kind of one of those toss-ups. And look, they could coat both of them. We saw that happen last year with Cole Swider and Kendall Brown, right? DeLon Wright maybe doesn't work out the way you want him to, and maybe they're like, you know what, we don't need to carry four bigs, and all of a sudden they want to bring back Monty Morrison after he's kind of recouped from this injury. Because I don't think that ruling out Monty Morris potentially coming back is out of the question. I think that it all depends on how DeLon plays, because it's just the training camp deal.
Right, exactly. It's good enough, and it's training camp, it's non-guarantee. I guess all these things are kind of the same thing. It's not like an Exhibit 10. It's not that kind of situation where you're basically bringing somebody with all intent for them to be on your G League team. And that's the case with Jalen Slauson and Gabe McLaughlin are both on Exhibit 10 deals. Apparently they're going to be allowed to hang out in camp this year. There's, not a lot of reason to think they're going to be considered, for actual roster spots. But I think, they want, with one guy who's taking off a roster spot being out, and two more guys who are dealing with Achilles tendon tears, coming back from Achilles tendon tears. It seems like it's probably the first time you've seen Rick Carlisle, take the full boat, as far as available, training camp roster spots. We haven't seen him bring the full 21, the 18 kind of standard contract guys in the 3-2 ways. We haven't seen that yet. This is the first time we're going to see that. I think, it is judging right. If it basically do they feel like he can handle it or not? And they might come to the conclusion of, we can get something better elsewhere. We can wait to see what shakes out. You certainly get a sense of who all else gets brought into camp. If anybody else gets cut, what else might be on the market at that point. They're going to, keep their eyes open. I get the idea, I certainly Dylan's in the driver's seat. If he has a good camp, he can stick. But you never know with where they're at this point. Certainly it's interesting that they didn't come up with this decision, not come to a conclusion on who they wanted to bring in until the last couple weeks, of September to start with. So, we'll see what they're looking for, what they want. But I do think they consider it critically important. Rick's a guy who likes to have two, ball handlers on the floor at all times, and he's not going to have that as much as he'd like this year. So I would have a hard time imagining that he'd be able to go into the regular season not knowing who his third point guard is.
Yeah, it seemed today, like from the comments we heard, it was a lot of, well, Andrew's our initiator, and then Pascal's our second guy, right? It didn't seem like they were like, oh, we want to give Mathurin more of those opportunities. It was more, Pascal can be our secondary playmaker. And Pascal, I thought he kind of had a bar that was like lightly dropped in there, but he's like, I feel like I can adapt to any level, like any style of play. And that's one of the things that we've kind of noticed with Pascal. Like, just think about how he played in Toronto, comes here, adapts to the Pacers' random offense and thrives. He shot I believe it was a career high from three last year, if I'm not mistaken. So had some really good numbers from him and just really adapted this style of play. And so obviously it'll be a little bit different, but was there somebody that you were looking forward to hearing from heading into the day? And then if you did, like, what was one of the things you wanted to find out?
Yeah. I was interested on all of them kind of saying the same thing, or addressing the same sort of issue. And I was just wanted to get a sense of, okay, what do you guys think changes And I got some of this, but I wanted to be like, okay, when you look at your style of play, because that's such a driving force of their success last year is the ways that they were willing to play that other teams were not, just to bring that much pace and just try to exhaust teams, and be able to play, bring that much pressure on defense and play that fast on offense and deal with that much ball movement. I wanted to get just a sense from all of them. Okay, what do you look at and say this has to be bedrock? This has to be stuff that, as long as this group is together in any form, this is how they're going to play. This is how they're going to operate. And what are the things that you look at and you say, well, you have to adapt this when you don't have your engine, your offensive driver. And it was interesting to see where all that was going to go. And I feel like they only kind of bit on that question. They certainly bit on the idea of, okay, we have a standard, that we want to set. We don't want drastic changes in how we operate. We want there to be a core understanding of how we play. And I think their view in terms of what is core is, it is bring pressure. I think they have fully bought into the idea of defensive full court man to man. They believe that is something that they have to do more than anybody else in the league. They believe that has to be, the thing that they do. They certainly were a horrendous defense not very long ago, and believe that was what changed the game for them, was being willing and able to bring pressure 94 feet and have not just your lead defending ball handler guy, do it, not just your Nembhards and even your Neesmiths, but, have Pascal Siakam being willing and able to, if you have a wing, bring the ball up, have Pascal be able to take him on for 94 feet, or somebody like Miles Turner, literally to be in the backcourt when they tried to give it to Wembanyama in that one Spurs game. They still view that as, I think, bedrock. Pace is bedrock. Ball movement is bedrock. I think where they didn't answer is like, okay, well, what does it look like when you guys get into half court? How does that change when you don't have Halliburton creating that kind of gravity where he's getting double teamed on every single ball screen and he's getting blitzed, which means, somewhere there's an open guy. When you don't have that kind of gravity and you're not seeing people blitz as much or cheat as much or anything like that, what do you have to do to kind of create space to operate? What's that look like? There was not as much delving into detail there, and they might not have all those answers yet. And so I think that's kind of the interesting piece for me to find out, is like, all right, because they said a lot of things about, okay, everybody's got to do a little bit more, everybody's got to chip in more here, but it's less the math problem that I'm interested in as it is the geometry problem. I think
I was gonna say, I thought Neesmith really kind of hinted at that a little bit when he asked about it, right? He said that, Ty will get rid of the ball quicker, where Drew likes to get more downhill, likes to get in the paint, maybe takes an extra dribble or two, and he has to learn how to position himself to kind of be that outlet pass for him, because it's going to be in a different spot from where he would catch it from Ty. And I thought, okay, that's probably the most geometrical comment we heard about how they're going to spread the floor. But other than that, everybody was just like, no, we just got to adapt. And they're just very generic answers. But I thought that was probably the more detailed answer that I heard from anybody, unless I missed somebody.
Yeah, no, I tried to push him and TJ on that a little bit. Sorry, we're going to be on the move here because got to let the dog back in. I think, sorry, we're going to,
that's all right. We got Dustin in the dark right now, ladies and gentlemen. This is great.
Yeah. I think TJ said a little bit, I think, just about just trying to get 2 feet in the paint. I mean, I think that was a big piece to it, is just saying, okay, if you just attack a defense, because if you really think about it, obviously TJ McConnell, a lot of times is on the floor without Halliburton. Certainly they've used them more and more together over time, and sort of having Tyrese as kind of the second ball handler and operating more of a shooting guard role in certain cases, or even letting TJ run around off the ball, but just having both of those guys together, but there's been enough times when TJ's had to create gravity himself, and he's done that just by attacking the paint, getting in there, forcing people to collapse on him and trying to find an open man at that point. And I think that's another piece to it, is what it really comes down to is, at the end of the day, people have to be able to attack off the bounce, and create off the bounce. And I think they prefer to keep the ball popping so that it doesn't stick in anybody's hands, basically. And when you certainly don't want a situation where, they want less of a situation of they catch the ball and there's a defender there on the catch that they have to beat. and they would rather keep the ball moving and find somebody eventually who has space, who has an angle, who has a defender who's scrambled, basically, who's trying to run back to them, trying to close out. They can either attack that off the bounce or just shoot clean. They'd rather have that than have a lot of situations where they're doing a whole ton of, drive and kick. They're certainly willing to drive and kick, but it's just there might have to be more relying on that and more drive and kick when you're dealing with a set defender, and just trying to break it up that way and force defenses to come in and open up things from that angle. I think that's a big piece to what they're thinking of, is that if they're not going to have sort of natural gravity, they have to create it. And they have to make people defend them without them going in with the game plan of you gotta get the ball out of this guy's hand. And if they're not going to have as many of those type of guys, certainly Siakam's going to deal with some doubles, but the rest of them to start off with probably aren't. And so it's forcing, make defenses collapse around you by what you do with the ball, versus having a guy who's already enters a game with that level of gravity. So I think that's sort of what was hinted at, but they didn't certainly go into detail about that. But that's, I think that's the message I seem to get out of that.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I've been thinking about too is just we saw how teams guarded Tyrese so heavily, where Drew had to kind of be that ball handler to start the offense off. Yeah. Do you think that there's going to be some kind of schematic thing against the Pacers where you say, hey, they're without Halliburton, we're going to do all that Halliburton defense on Nembhard now, and kind of make them play offense without Nembhard running the show, and now you're putting more pressure on Mathurin to kind of initiate offense, because we know Siakam can't just do what Nembhard did last year for the majority of the time that he did it. So I'm just curious, like if I was a team scheming the Pacers defensively, I might say, hey, let's face guard Nembhard and keep the ball out of his hands and kind of force Mathurin and Nesmith to be more initiators of the offense than, what the Pacers were dealing with last year. Obviously, Ty had a totally different level of an offensive playmaker and an engine than Drew. Yeah. But I just think if I'm looking at this Pacers team, like, yeah, I'm going to make those two guys beat me because they haven't proven that they can be initiators, number one, or for Nesmith, in that case, like really put the ball on the floor and do much offensively. I mean, we know Mathurin can get to the basket, but like he's not someone that's going to lead your team in assist.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I do think though there's a lot of potential for Siakam to take advantage of that. I do think that's still big, is that, as he was sort of pointing out today, I mean, he was used to handling the ball at Toronto, and it's sort of like, okay, do you want to put the ball in his hands? Like if you're getting the ball out of Nembhard's hands and you're putting it in Siakam's, either A, are you going to rush over and double team him and then let him create? Because I think he can still do that. I'm not going to put it past him to be able to create off the perimeter and find an advantageous position. I mean, I think to your point, I mean, there are questions about, okay, make Aaron Nesmith beat you off the dribble. If you can create that situation, I think that's one you want to find out about. Certainly he's come a long way in his ability to attack off the bounce, but he's still kind of one of those straight line driver type of people. Like when there's an alley, he can take it and he can finish. But, is he going to cross up a defender? Usually not. He's going to keep the ball moving rather than do that. But can he, if he's expected to? Because, a big reason why like that hasn't been his assignment. He hasn't been tested on a lot of that stuff. If you force him into positions where he's got to, get a guy off balance, create his own more often, is he further along in that than we realize? I think, yeah, that is, if you can cause that situation as a defense, if you hey, let's find out what you can do, Aaron Nesmith. I mean, I think that's not a bad decision, but I feel like you can put yourself in a disadvantageous position if you're gonna double Nembhard. I'm thinking about situations where this isn't the exact same thing you're talking about here, but where I just remember thinking early after the All-Star break, Halliburton was getting, when he was just going off in that stretch, the gravity on him was so great at that point, because he just wasn't missing and he was getting doubled wherever he went, and he was just hitting Turner per T-ball threes on a pick and pop. I mean, they were just wide open because he had guys going all the way downhill with him to just try to take that drive away. And, it was easy stuff for Miles Turner on a kickback. But it seemed like when Halliburton then got hurt, missed some time with lower back, missed some time with the groin, you just didn't see them nearly in as much scramble mode, when they were running ball screens for Nembhard, and that seemed to work for the defenses. Basically, it made it harder to kind of, for the Pacers kind of unstagnate themselves if you kind of covered them straight up, or you just switched. If you just, it just made a difference when you weren't putting two bodies on Nembhard, and you weren't giving up that pick and pop three to Turner, and you weren't creating the rest of the scramble after that. So, I mean, I'm sure there's things you could do. I think you definitely want to test Nembhard, but if you're an opposing defense, but I've seen him enough that I wouldn't trust that. I've watched Andrew Nembhard enough to feel like, all right, like don't, you're probably better off playing him straight up than you are trying to get cute. Because
that's a good point.
Get cute.
Because I mean, and let's be honest, like Rick Carlisle is going to find a solution if you're going to try to do something to this Pacers offense, try to disrupt it. I mean, it might work for a little bit, but they're going to find ways to beat it, and they're going to probably change up the rotation, put somebody else in that's more of a ball handler, whoever that might be at the time. So I think that's all just things to think about, and it does kind of like talk about the depth of this team and how you can potentially do that kind of stuff. Talk about DeLon Wright. Like if he's on the roster and he's a third string point guard, maybe you play McConnell a little bit more to help alleviate some of that role. And here's DeLon that can kind of relieve both those guys. So that all plays a factor. But you talk about, just adapting and things like that and taking on bigger roles. Well, Benn Mathurin is one of those guys that huge opportunity here for him. Sure. Offensively, we know what he can do. And I think that having a little bit of a nice change of pace offensively from what they do is actually a good thing at times. And we saw last year when Haliburton was out, like he had some pretty big numbers next to Nembhard as a starter. So I'm not worried about the offense, but defensively, I thought you asked him a great question because I've always got this observation that he prefers playing on-ball defense against the guy with the ball in his hands versus playing off-ball defense, trying to prevent somebody from running through screens and things like that. So how much of a bigger uptick in responsibility do you see that the coaching staff putting on Mathurin to be guarding players defensively, and how do you think he'll handle that challenge?
I think it's gonna, it's definitely gonna help him for sure. I think you'll see him more engaged. You'll see him more locked in. I mean, we know this. Like Benn Mathurin absolutely thinks of basketball as a one-on-one game. For better and for worse, it is on some level his his superpower and his Achilles heel at the same time. Sorry, I know that wasn't fair. I know.
Oh, Dustin, why'd you?
I know I get it. But I mean, all the same, it's just like it is his strongest point and his weakest point is that he can get lost in a 5-on-5 game, but like he. I mean, like I can't remember what he was doing it for, but he was like a guest reporter. Maybe it was the finals or the draft. I can't remember, but like he went there and like the first thing he did, whoever was being interviewed, he asked, "Hey, remember when I beat you at one-on-one?" Like Benn remembers every one-on-one at every pickup game, every camp, every. Like that's the stuff that Benn remembers, because he thinks like he just thinks of life as mano a mano, like he really does. And so the way that you can best get that out of him defensively is have him go pick up a guy 94 feet away, where for half a court it's just him and that guy. And that's what he's got to think about. He's got to try to navigate a screen. Certainly somebody's going to try to peel him off, but it's just those two things. It's just, okay, avoid that screen, stay on that guy, harass him, make his life harder, take the ball if you can, but mostly just, make him take up clock, make him uncomfortable, get up in him and make him feel like you're better than him. That's what he loves. That's what he relishes doing. And he's going to be way more locked into that than he is going to be if he's got to wait for the ball up the court and he's got to chase somebody else around and think about, well, I got to switch here, or I got to not switch here, or, we've got to have kind of a 3-person, like when it gets complicated, when he's just got to be thinking about that stuff away from the ball, like it's harder for him to stay engaged. We've seen him get lost in those situations before and him get out of whack when it comes into rotation. This keeps him locked in. And kind of the switch kind of stuff is easier, and it makes a lot of sense. You tack on the fact that I do think it's important. Like they got to keep Andrew Nembhard on the court, and like as I think Rick pointed out, I think it was on Caitlin's podcast, was just like, how many times does it might have been somebody else. I don't know. He was just saying, how often does Andrew Nembhard pick up a couple fouls early? How often does Tyrese Haliburton pick up a couple fouls early? Like that's partly by how they play, but it's partly by design. You protect Haliburton, in part because he's not as good of an on-ball defender, but also because, you want to keep him on the floor, and you can afford to let Nembhard be more aggressive. And so in this case, you might have to keep him from being aggressive. You might have to keep him, just have some possessions where he's not defending 94 feet and he's not going to, pick up a hand check foul or something like that. And so, it makes a difference a lot of ways across the board. I really thought you saw a lot of growth in Mathurin defensively last year. Early on when Nesmith was out, he had to take the second perimeter assignment. Even if it wasn't on the ball, he still had to get somebody who was top level and keep that guy from burning him. And there was a lot of growth there because again, he thinks of it so much this way. He wants to be Kobe Bryant. Like that is his, North Star in terms of the player he wants to be. But he just thinks of it so much as me versus you. And this is how you unlock as much of that as you can in him.
No, I agree. I think that Mathurin to me is the most fascinating player probably heading into this season just because contract year coming up. He's so confident, but I like what he said too when I asked him about what he learned from the playoff experience. And he was like, I might play 35 minutes, 17 minutes, or 6 minutes. It's just doing whatever the team needs and being ready. And I thought, that's maturity that we've seen from Mathurin from day one to now. And you were talking about him remembering every one-on-one. It reminded me of what you were saying there in the finals. I think it was Jamal Murray that he asked that question to.
Yeah, you're right. You are right.
When the Nuggets won the championship against the Heat, I believe it was. So
yes,
yeah, it's just he's just a funny guy. He's wired differently. So as we wrap things up here, I mean, there's more stuff that happened at Media Day, but nothing too crazy. If you guys want to check that out, there's about an hour and a half video from all of our questions with the guys. If you want to check that out on Pacers.com or YouTube and the Pacers channel there. But training camp day one, what are some of the things you're most interested in asking about or looking forward to seeing play out in training camp?
I think, I want to see what the centers look like and how that shakes out because I do think it's just so wide open. I could see it going any number of different ways. I think what we heard today, the most sort of factually interesting thing was that Isaiah Jackson's 240 pounds. Like that in a weird way, there's definitely some blessing in disguise to the injury for him because he just had to be off his feet for how long. Put on a bunch of weight, then had to melt a lot of it back off. And I think he's now where he wants to be. And I'm very interested to see of how that looks once he's got to run around with it because the explosion is such a big piece to it, but he clearly did need to be heavier. He needed some muscle. He needed to be able to not be pushed around. So I want to see what that looks like. I want to see how that plays with James Wiseman. I want to see how that plays with Jay Huff. I want to see just how they want to operate that group. So that development is going to be interesting because I really do like a lot of times you go into some of these, position battles and you get the idea that someone has an edge, like you're thinking, okay, like this is a competition, but I really kind of think I know who's going to win it. I don't, in this case, have an idea what they're going to do. And I don't know that it's necessarily going to be whoever is the starting on opening day is the starter. I think that there's going to be a lot of mix and match and moving around with this group. And I'm very interested to see how it looks across the board. I'm interested to see in these preseason games what Mathurin looks like. I do still think that's the most fascinating long-term story because I think there's just offensively, I think it's still interesting because it's, it goes back to the whole conundrum they've had the whole time is, there's how you might want Benn Mathurin to play to win you a game tonight versus how you want Benn Mathurin play if you want to win a championship. And they're two different things, often. So what's that look like? Long term is that, if you've got no Halliburton, your probably most effective thing is to let Ben be Ben. But if you want to kind of keep this train on the track for next year, the year after, you need Mathurin to grow into the quick shoot guy that you've been talking to him about for years. So how do you balance that this year? That's the fascinating one. That's a fascinating one for me. Obviously, what the decision they make with that 15th roster spot that we just talked about so far, is it, DeLon Wright? Is it going to be Tony Bradley? What does that look like? All those pieces I think are really, really interesting. Obviously we're only going to hear so much about camp itself and the practices and everything like that. Rick will be Rick about it. But certainly you'll see that stuff come to light when you start seeing preseason games. And, we're only 8 days away from the first one as we record this right now. There's going to be a preseason basketball game in 8 days. Wow.
Yeah. And next Sunday is the Fan Jam. So it's pretty crazy. It's all coming up so quick. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see what they do. Sure. And I just want to say another thing I forgot to bring up, and I just want to touch on it really quick is Jarace Walker because
sure.
A lot of stuff with him and Pascal in the offseason, doing the workouts and whatnot, and then asking him questions today and him just kind of talking about things. I know you touched on some of the boxing stuff that he did in the offseason, and one of the things I thought was fascinating when asking him about the finals run, like what he learned from that, he said, it's all about the team. It's about team. But before that, he said, yeah, there's times throughout the season where
you can pout.
And I was like, oh, okay. So like, obviously that was something that probably he did a little bit where he got in his feels thinking he should get more playing time or get more opportunity. And it's just those highs and those lows. And Rick's been very adamant, like, hey, he got like 1,000 minutes last year. He got plenty of playing time. Like I wasn't holding it back, like that whole thing. So I'm just really curious to see the maturation we see from Jarace. I mean, when Tony asked him about like how much different is it going from year 2 to year 3 when you think you got it all figured out going into year 2, like he just kind of smiled so big. It's just Jarace to me is probably the second most fascinating outside of Mathurin in terms of growth and opportunity this year. I think he's probably under the radar too for a lot of people outside of Indiana.
Yeah, no, because they're the lottery picks, at the end of the day. And I don't mean this to be as derisive as it often sounds, but I've sometimes called them the shiny objects because, I think, frequently, I think throughout this whole project, there have been a lot of people who were like, okay, well, why does Aaron Nesmith get to play ahead of Benn Mathurin? And why does Ben Shepherd get to play ahead of Jarace Walker? And it's because Aaron Nesmith and Ben Shepherd do exactly what you tell them to do every time. And, Nesmith, you've seen that really, really blossom. Shepherd to a lesser extent. But he, doesn't have to do as much to beat out Jarace Walker as Aaron Nesmith has to do to beat up Ben Mathurin at this point. Again, you've seen how much Nesmith has grown and he's a weapon. At this point on both ends of the floor, and Shepherd is to a lesser extent. And so Walker and Mathurin, they have broader skill sets. There's more things that they can do. But getting it all together has been a project, so far. Projects, maybe, I know that's a loaded term and it's probably unfair. But they, there's been these ups, these downs, these growth points where you see the capacity in both of them to be excellent players because they have these measurables that are spectacular in some way, shape, or form. Mathurin just as a scorer, the ability to put up these 30-point games from time to time, and Walker, when you just look at the wingspan and how much you thought, okay, how good of a defensive player can be, but he's got point guard vision, but sometimes he's makes smart passes with very little velocity on them and they get picked off and stuff like that. You're just seeing there's flashes there. He's grown so much as a shooter. He's a much better shooter than he was when we drafted him, so you see this, some 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. And it is very interesting when you're watching these guys up close in terms of what's going to make them ultimately click and pay off for the pick that was invested in versus what might not. And so it is interesting. I think Jarace is funny because he can be really open from time to time, like probably too open for his own good. But really honest about frustration, really honest about how it feels when you don't get to play and stuff like that. And that pout thing on some level was immature, but some way it was mature in its own way of saying of being real about the fact that when you want to get in, it hurts. I asked him last year, and one thing I thought was really interesting that he said was I said, well, what have they told you about what you need to do to play? He's like, it's not, he says, what they've told me is it's really not me. It's just, we have a lot of good players and, I'm going to get some opportunities at some point in time, but at the end of the day, the reason I'm not playing is not because they don't think I can play or that I've done this wrong or that wrong. It's that, Aaron Nesmith's ahead of you, Ben Mathurin's ahead of you, you're not playing 2 guard, you're playing 3, and those are the 2 threes. So, you're not going to jump those 2 at this point. And so someone has to move, pieces have to move for you to get an option. At the 4, you got Pascal Siakam and Obi Toppin. So what used to be your path isn't there anymore. And he's had to deal with that. And I think that's it, but he does keep showing up. He does listen. I think he's, taking the right things from Pascal Siakam. I think that Pascal really wants to make him a better player, and Siakam's investment so far in making other guys better players, I think, is very interesting. I think he looks at Walker as a piece of clay that he can really, really mold. And so I think there's a lot of potential there. So yeah, a lot of interesting things on Jarace's plate. And the backup 3 is his to lose, at this point, with Mathurin shifting up into the starting lineup. It's basically like, Johnny Furphy can up and, take it away from him, I guess. But, Walker's going to get first dibs on that. He's the more physically developed. He's got, more refined game at this point. But he does have to earn it because, Furphy's coming as far as that's concerned. I mean, I think probably this year, for a lot of it, for if he's your 11th guy, he'll probably be in a similar situation to Walker, where some nights he plays and some nights he doesn't. But Walker has the opportunity to hold him off and be part of that second unit all year, but he can also blow that. So it's very fascinating to see how that's going to shake out, what lessons he takes, how he applies them.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if we're watching a game and Jarace makes a bad play and starts pouting. Rick pulls and puts Furphy in, and all of a sudden
plays. Yeah.
Furphy gets like a week or two of playing in that spot, and Jarace gets pulled out. Like, it would not shock me. I don't want that to be the case, because I believe in Jarace Walker a lot. I'm hoping that in year 3 he does kind of learn, like, okay, I've got to really step up my maturity level and approach every single
assertiveness. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the willy-nilly gambles, he talked about that. He said he's gotten better on that end, but it's also just like Chad Buchanan talked about him playing with force on a consistent basis. Can he do that? And I think he's got what it takes to do it. It's just, he's got to get out of his own head, I think, and that's going to help him the most in terms of his development. But Dustin, this has been a lot of fun. I know you said you got a piece coming out on J Huff. Find that at the Indy Star. You're at Dustin Dopirak.
It's going to be a couple weeks before that comes out. But
weeks, okay.
Yeah, so it'll be before the season starts, but I mean, we'll hopefully get.
Is it going to be like one of your long form pieces we've seen before with like
hoping so,
Tyrese?
Yeah, hoping so. I don't know if it'll be as good, but
I'm interested.
But I appreciate that. But no, that's certainly what I'm shooting for with it. Hopefully, got a chance, like I said, to talk to his dad. Got a chance to talk to, Ron Sanchez, who was the assistant at Virginia when he was recruited, and is at Baylor now, and was the head coach for a little while when Tony Bennett retired. So have I think some pretty good insights there. I mean, I think there might not be as much depth. I think the story is pretty clear, though. It's a resilient story. I think that's what that J Huff is that just a guy that's hung around and, always kind of kept believing that his time was going to come. And that goes back to when he was in high school. It's always been believing that, all right, if you hang in there, you're going to get an opportunity. And that was the case in high school, was the case in college. And now it's the case in the NBA. And so I think that's kind of the theme that you're going to see with that one. And hopefully that should come out right before the season starts.
I'm excited to read that, because I feel like we still don't know enough about J Huff yet. We're still trying to learn him, and I think this will help people get a better understanding of who he is. And so last one for me, because I can't help myself. IU football, baby. They squeaked one out against Iowa, but still undefeated. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I said, if you don't include the Big Ten championship, I think they only lose one game this year, and I think it's either Penn State or Oregon. I think they're going to win the other one. How do you feel about IU?
Yeah, they could. I mean, I'm a Penn State grad, so I had to see that, watch that one very intently on Oregon on Saturday night. That was rough. So no, I mean, I think if you're a Penn State fan, and I don't know if I am again or not, but I'd be nervous if you're Penn State about playing Indiana. I think the Penn State looks very vulnerable. They're just offensively, I mean, they just could not move the ball at all until late in the fourth quarters, where suddenly they just did. But they still only throw the ball so well. They have two fantastic running backs, and yet they weren't really moving the ball. Indiana, they moved through Illinois, knife. That was knife through butter type of stuff. I mean, Iowa's obviously tougher. Iowa is your classic trap game. They always are. Iowa reminds me of Rutgers in basketball, where they just make your life their life might be hard, but they'll make your life miserable too. Moving the ball is not something that they allow to happen. They're just, it is a grind, and that's how they operate. So, I don't think that winning at Iowa, if you can win at Iowa, just don't, throw the tape out, thank your lucky stars you won. And that's, I don't think that implies anything. Penn State's still tough defensively, and I'm sure it won't be easy to move the ball on them. I think Penn State's certainly vulnerable. Oregon kind of impressed me, but they didn't blow me away. I mean, I didn't look at them. It was wild. I went to the Big Ten championship game, last year in Indy, and watched Penn State Oregon, and just it was like how obviously there's not a lot of transfers and NFL guys and everything, but it's wild to think, how are these the same schools playing, 9 months removed? I mean, that ball, there was so much scoring in that game in Indy in December, and there was so little scoring in Beaver Stadium Saturday night. So yeah, both those teams look vulnerable enough. I don't think it's a lock at all that Indiana loses both those games. I think you're totally right. They can win one of those, and if they win one, they're in the playoff. just for sure. I think, I mean, like you said, if they win one of those, could find themselves in the Big Ten championship game, could find themselves going up against Ohio State. Don't know how good you feel about that. That Ohio State looks the best so far. But I mean, that impressive against Illinois, that performance against Illinois was really, really, really impressive. They got terrific pieces, like they're manhandling people on the front lines, both of them. So, I mean, It's a good recipe. I'll be very interested to see what it looks like. Oregon's next week, if I'm not mistaken. I'd be very intrigued as to what that game looks like.
Yeah, I've got about $35 on the line here for this bet that I made on Sunday. So we'll see. My buddy's a Notre Dame fan, so I'm just giving him crap because obviously last year Notre Dame got the better of IU.
Right.
Said, well, they shouldn't have even had a home game, They lost to Illinois. Just rubbing salt in the wound, obviously. Not that big of a deal. They're the better team. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Make sure you guys follow Dustin. All of his great coverage is going to be picking up on a daily basis now as Pacers hit training camp preseason just around the corner. And we got games coming up too. So Pacer Nation, thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will do it again soon. Peace out.
Setting the pace, going to the top. Setting the pace, going to the top. This is your number one podcast. Sweeping every team. We gon' need a mop. Smooth.
Baby.